Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians webinar series, Youth in Action, Conversations about Our Future. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jem Shandine Labarda, and I am a cultural interpreter at the National Museum of the American Indian. I'm also a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Youth in Action is a monthly webinar series featuring young Native activists and changemakers from across the Western Hemisphere who are working towards equity and social justice for Indigenous people. As we begin today's program, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native people on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. In recognition of Women's History Month, this Youth in Action conversation focuses on Native women leaders who are working to increase and amplify Indigenous representation, voices, and causes at all levels of society. Native women have influenced our national narrative for generations, but their experiences, perspectives, and contributions are often overlooked. This buffalo horn belt, called Women Defenders of Others, was made by a Lakota artist, Kevin and Valerie Pouyer, to honor the strength and power of Native women. And it's currently on prominent display at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. The belt is made of 8 portrait conchas, each carved with the likeness of a Native woman whose dedication and achievements have paved the way for change. Like Mary Catherine Nagel of the Cherokee Nation on the left, she is a lawyer dedicated to protecting the rights of Native people and the sovereignty of tribal governments. And we have Wanda Batchelor of the Washoe Nation. She was the first chairwoman to lead her tribe. Suzanne Schoen Harjo, a citizen of the Cheyenne and Muskogee Nations on the left. She was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of her outstanding service to civil rights. Suzanne was key to the passage of several acts of Congress related to Indian cultural issues. And since 1992, she's led the campaign against disparaging sports team names. These women and countless others have helped to pave the way for future generations seeking equity and opportunity for Native people and all Americans. In today's program, we are honored to feature 2 young Native women of our current generation who are working at local and state levels to make change. Aidan Graybill, who serves on the Executive Council of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, and Christina Haswood, one of the youngest members in the Kansas State Legislature. As you each introduce yourself, please say a little bit about when you chose to get involved with social issues and why. Who inspired you to do the type of work that you're doing? Let's start with Aidan.
Hello, my name is Aidan Graybill. I'm a third year law student at the University of Kansas. So I originally started my college education doing physical therapy because I really wanted to help people. But then I realized science and I didn't get along very well. So I transferred to anthropology at the advice of a really great advisor because there was a lot of overlap between the requirements. So I was still able to get through in 4 years. And during my time in anthropology, I realized there were a lot of like critical issues when it came to the work that anthropologists did in Native communities. And so that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of focusing on social issues of anthropology. And it was kind of just another way to kind of help Native communities get put back in contact with the stuff that anthropologists took from them, whether that be cultural or like physical objects as well. And then going down that route even further, I realized how much anthropology and law kind of intertwined. And growing up, I actually had a little bit of law going on in the background all the time. My grandfather passed away when I was really young, and he actually had some land that was allotted to our family out in Idaho. And upon his passing, it kind of reopened the case, the probate case about like, who owns that allotment, like what's going on with it. So it's Indian land, so it gets even more complicated in that aspect because there are all sorts of weird probate laws and like descendancy rules when it comes to Indian land that I never understood. And since Idaho is so far away from my tribal community in Kansas and my family generally, we were trying to give it to the tribal community back in Idaho, and the courts weren't really having that. There was a whole lot of disagreement about what to do with the land, and I just never quite understood why it was an issue that we just wanted to give the land back. So it's still going on. It's been going on since I was in third grade, and that curiosity of like, what the heck is going on? Like, why can't this just be resolved? Is kind of what brought me to law school in the end, and I came to the University of Kansas for their tribal law and government program. I'm also pursuing a master's of Indigenous studies. And I came to KU because my grandfather and my mother both attended, and I was really encouraged by my mom and my dad to attend law school and just, really pursue this interest of mine. And I'm also able to connect with my tribal community, Wyandot Nation of Kansas, that is based in Kansas City, Kansas. I'm in my third year currently, and I'm really excited to take all this knowledge that I've gained and get out there and kind of see, what the issue is.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think that I can definitely relate to that science struggle. Christina, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more?
Gat é sé cé dena sé é Christina Haswood dhéine sé tuaire tíní na sam. The Bethlehem Bashast na Tapahan, Dasha Cheki Aniashnella. Hello, my name is Christina Haswood, Representative Christina Haswood. I'm Bitterwater Bornfield Black Sheep people. My maternal grandparents are the Zuni Edgewater, and my paternal grandparents are the Towering House people. That's why I'm a young Navajo woman. My background is in public health and social justice issues, and social science ended up coming together for me. I believe, writing and presenting papers with data only show parts of the story of people's lives. And I really wanted to connect the statistics to the people, but also see how research takes that a step further. And that's kind of where my curiosity led to policymaking. At the core of policymaking, it's representation, like myself, who makes these types of decisions. And I noticed there was a gap in services and opportunities for different communities, in particular a lot with tribal communities, where we focus a lot on reservations and tribal policy, but we don't know maybe the gap of urban and rural tribal isn't closed as often. And to be a member, you have to live within the zip code of a lot of our tribal nations. For example, with my chapter house, sometimes you have to have a physical address there to even get some of the benefits or the safety net barriers for our people. But I saw these disparities between those living in the urban and reservation areas, and I was really curious on how we can close these gaps. There is a lot of statistics out there, and when I went to higher education, it was astonishing to see that us Indigenous peoples were always in the high risk group or high mortality, high morbidity. But it seemed like a lot of efforts weren't really addressing those. But if they were grant programs and they were great for those couple of years. But, how do we really affect systemic change and sustain the positive impact that these can bring to our communities? How I got into politics and policy. Never really saw myself in politics, but when I saw the opportunity at the state level to combine public health, research, being a young Indigenous woman, and to address these social justice issues, I hopped on the opportunity. And I was lucky enough to have the guidance of other Indigenous women that are in politics across the country. So gaps in education, difficulties in Native students, also gaps in policy at the state and federal level. How do we bring these all together? And also scholarship regulations that limit the geographical location of applicants. And, making sure that we have Native people gain citizenship and voting rights to make sure those are not discriminated as they historically were. And one of the greatest works that inspired me was the Missing Women Indigenous peoples issue, Missing Word Indigenous Women's, which I did at the nonprofit national level. And what really got me involved, the one moment I think I can pinpoint is when Representative Dr. Ponkowi Victors had a press release for a Missing Word Indigenous Peoples bill in Kansas. I ended up kind of skipping class that morning from grad school to actually witness this go down in the State House. And I offered her afterwards my expertise in the urban area, but also I was really grateful that she let me stand, a lot of us who came in support, to stand behind her for this very important issue here in Kansas. Other great women I look up to is Congresswoman Sharice Davis, Congresswoman Deb Haaland, and all those who came before me who broke this glass ceiling for representation, I believe really helped me be successful where I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can hear in both of your guys's inspirations of really how you found your passions. And sometimes it is something that many people either know from a very young age what it is that they want to do. Some people do figure it out along the way, and many have to create an entirely new space for their hopes and dreams to come to fruition. Christina, why is it important that women be in the roles and spaces that you currently are in?
This is where my mind jumps to. I've been on I watched a couple presentations on women in politics, and there's always these statistics where a woman had to be asked maybe once or twice to run for office, and I was one of those women. And this statistic oftentimes is in my mind where, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because we're often taught as Indigenous peoples, if your community needs you and they ask for your help, you step up to the plate. But I believe issues such as mental health and maternal health and well-being, being female, in education, and this whole different perspective can really bring good solutions that oftentimes might be overlooked at. Someone has to break these glass ceilings. In the state legislature, positions are mostly accessible to men or older women. And I say that as a young person where maybe the financial barrier of this is probably the biggest hurdle for many. And in my family, my mother is the main breadwinner with a college degree. I believe women have unique perspectives to policy and activism that we really need to listen to. And looking a lot into our culture and our ancestors, women are the backbone of our tribal nations and our communities. And this is important, where we bring this perspective into the modern world. And other more modern examples is basic things such as pads and tampons that aren't as easily accessible. And, when I think about that and I think about in my current workspace, they're not as accessible. You have to bring your own feminine products, which, it shouldn't be like that. And this is something that we can't control. But also other things too, such as the gender pay gap as well. And these ideas that come from our culture and being strong women. In my family, my mother was the one that got the college degree, and I saw her provide for our family in a very, in all types of way. And she's, along with my father too, has taught me how to be this young Indigenous Diné woman. Having women in politics and diverse backgrounds helps foster a better world for Natives and broader United States communities.
Thank you so much for that, Christina. Yeah, Aidan, could you add on to that? Why is it important that women be in these roles and spaces that you currently find yourself in?
So I was very lucky to have a very recent experience as to why this is important. I was super fortunate to work for a law firm where I was working for a senior attorney who was a Native woman, and I had 3 associate attorneys that I could turn to that were all Native women, that were all active members of their tribes. And it was so important because I was working under a Native American law practice group. So we were working for tribal communities. And so we were better able to serve our clients because we understood what it was like to walk into a general meeting and have your counsel come in, the counsel for the tribe come in and sit there and you're listening to them and you're like, what are they talking about? And so we were better able to serve our clients, these tribal communities, because of the experiences that we have personally. And then being able to turn to those women helped a lot with experiencing the imposter syndrome that is totally inherent to the legal profession. And I think having those people there makes you so much more confident, and it gives you the opportunity to go ask someone, and confidently too. It's you get to go ask someone who's just like you, like, am I doing this right? Is this a weird thing to feel as I'm working? And being able to have those people there really opens up a lot of doors. It helps kind of revolutionize the space for people like me who are new to the field. And honestly, at least in my experiences as a mentor in law school, I can imagine they feel the same way. And being able to open up those doors for people who come after me as well. Creating spaces in the legal field for women is incredibly difficult. Kind of like Christina was saying, we just got a lactation room at our law school very recently. We and KU recently started providing, I think since I've been there, menstrual products for free in most bathrooms. So all sorts of things like that. And it's extremely difficult for women generally, but it's extremely more difficult for Native women because I'm probably one of the only self-identifying Native students at this point at the law school that I know of, unfortunately.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I think what you two have to bring to this conversation is something that many young people will find so much value and wisdom in. I know that these roles and positions we've fought to be in, and it does not come without challenges. Can you describe a time when you overcame a situation of adversity in your field? What did you do to overcome that challenge? What did you learn from that experience? Let's start with Aidan.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, imposter syndrome is inherent. Lots of things are inherently challenging about law school for everyone. There's this thing called the curve. It's, a bell curve, and basically your students are on it, right? These are the grades that you get for the semester, and it's distributed so someone always has to end up at the bottom. This kind of creates a sense of competition with classmates, which is not a welcoming environment. And I'm not a competitive person by nature. So that was really hard to grapple with. And I understood pretty clearly, pretty early on that I was like, I'm just going to get through it and do what I need to do to continue to be here, because just like everyone else, I'm paying tuition to be here. I deserve to be here. And that kind of helped with the imposter syndrome. Once I get out of law school, being in the real job market is going to be a little more difficult to deal with imposter syndrome. So that'll be another thing. And each year of law school presents new challenges and objectives that can be made harder because of different privileges or advantages that some people have. I worked my first year of law school, as well as studying. The school doesn't usually advise that. And, they have this idea of a perfect law school resume that you were supposed to have. You're supposed to do moot court, you're supposed to do law review or another publication, and you're supposed to be in the top 20% of class, and that'll give you, some sort of great, amazing job once you're out of school. And I chose not to do law review because I was writing it over spring break and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I just can't do this. And so I don't have that perfect law school resume. And I just kind of had to accept that, you just have to do what's right for you. And if it's not going to work for you, you just have to go for it. Something that really helped me was finding a sense of community and establishing a support system and looking for people who understand you and can kind of help you through, and you can support them also, is really important. And that kind of plays into the last question, I suppose, is like creating a community and like making sure people, women, Native women, are in this area. I try really hard to be a resource for first and second year law students, since I'm in my third year now. And then any others who are kind of like, if they just have a question, like right off the bat, if they just message me once even, I'm happy to help them. Or if, they end up being my friends, and anytime they have a question, I try to answer them honestly and try to give them a rundown of what I did facing those challenges that they are now facing.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Christina, could you share a little bit more about your experience?
Yeah, and I don't totally agree with Aidan. Like we're in these spaces that weren't built for Indigenous peoples or even women, for a matter of fact. Law school. I just think of like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her being the pioneer in that. But I can relate too. And being young, probably my biggest obstacle, and probably a lot where my life was invested in, was education, higher education. I was in higher ed for 8 years. At some point, I want to get back into getting my PhD someday. So with that 8 years, it's not the typical 6 years where I got my bachelor's and I got my grad school degree and the neatly bowed 6 years. No, actually, my undergrad took that 6 years because, I got my Associates of Science at Haskell Nations University in Lawrence. And I transferred to Arizona State University, and this was like the biggest shock of my young life, where I left Haskell with, like cum laude, and I was coming to Arizona State University feeling like, I got this. ASU is not ready for me. ASU is not ready for this Haskell grad. And little did I know, the transition to that was not smooth. I ended up that first semester failing like 3 of my classes, and they ended up stacking 3 science courses because I didn't understand really how important like science heavy public health really was. So I kind of avoided that at Haskell. And like, if you want to graduate in the 4 years of your bachelor's degree, this is what's going to have to happen. I was like, okay, bring it on. It knocked me down. I finished that first semester with a 1.21 GPA, and that just really shattered my world. And I did not handle that well in the most healthiest way at all. But luckily, I actually did a summer research enhancement program at Diné College on my reservation, where I got to actually live on the res for the summer, and went to Diné College, stayed there, and got to be taught public health from an Indigenous model and perspective from Diné College's logic learning model as well. And that's really where the bonds and things just start clicking with public health and being an Indigenous woman. And I got to do an externship in our capital, Window Rock, at the Navajo Nation Epidemiology Center. And this internship probably really saved me because, I was getting up at like 6 a.m. and sometimes we wouldn't be done with our activities until about 10 p.m. And I just absolutely loved it. And I was always telling myself, if I'm at this rock bottom of my life right now, and if I still want to get up every day at 6 a.m. to go to class, to learn about public health and to learn about statistical analysis and P charts and T tables, this is my passion. I think I found my passion. And that was such a comforting feeling to know. And it really helped me to move forward, but also to deal with that type of, negative experiences in a more healthy way. It also helped in my personal struggles too, and how it relates to my cultural practices. So I can think of during the campaign, even fast forwarding to last year, when things got a little bit down, I just went back to basics with my culture and our cultural practices. And it was usually at the guidance and recommendation of my mother, who told me to, quit, quit being so sad. You need to go pray. And she's like, did you put down cedar? Did you go running this morning? Did you go bless, you say your prayers in the morning? I was like, no, I didn't. And, when I did do it, it ended up, making me feel a lot better and a better positive attitude and mindset, which I think a lot of times we have to help us Indigenous peoples when we're in that negative mindset, when we don't feel the confidence in ourselves, to go back to basics. And how do we connect that to also in the gap of the urban and rural areas, or rural and urban areas? But I always want to go back to my community and encourage others to be in this spaces as well.
Yeah, sounds like your mom truly is the backbone of your family. I want to thank you both for sharing the struggles that you experienced in the education system and how you did overcome them. And it's important to know that only 67% of Native students graduate from high school. And while that number is low, I am grateful for you two sharing. Many times there is shame associated with these experiences. So we don't discuss these issues and they become overlooked. And many people do get lost in the system and become invisible. Aidan, you've seen and experienced the invisibility of Indigenous people in the legal and in the education field. Why does representation matter in the context of those situations in politics and policy?
Yeah. So one of my main concerns, among all the other things that we've discussed so far, I feel like we've almost touched on everything. But in addition to all that, I suppose things have been getting a little bit better after this most recent case, McGirt versus Oklahoma. We did see that, I think at least 3 justices understand federal Indian law to some degree. But if you look at the whole history of federal Indian law, I mean, you can take any case and you can make it go either way. If you're arguing one way, you can use it to argue in your favor. If you're arguing in the exact opposite way, you can still use that case to argue in your favor. That's because they people in the legal field kind of don't really know or don't really understand what's going on. They kind of just made things work for their agendas. They don't really know anything about tribes or their customs and traditions, and they don't really know that much about federal Indian law or tribal law or treaty law or anything like that. So representation in legal and political spaces ensures that all these promises that have been broken so far will hopefully start being respected at some point, and making sure that the issue of all these broken promises remain visible to policymakers and to judges. So if there's little to no understanding about kind of the collateral damage that can happen to a community in a court's decision, policymakers and judges won't put as much time or thought into understanding and interpreting treaty rights or upholding tribal sovereignty in a way that won't harm tribal communities.
Wow, you're absolutely correct that the invisibility of Indigenous peoples' rights guaranteed in treaties lead to harmful and misinformed policies to be put into place. Although the original intent might not be meant to cause harm, we see negative impacts today, not only in policy, but in the way Native women are perceived and treated in the legal system. 88% of violent crimes committed against Native American women are carried out by non Native perpetrators, and more than 4 in 5 Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. These statistics are terrifying, but they are important to know. Christina, while doing a little research about you for our interview, I read about how you overcame a smear campaign by an opponent while running for office. That is something that many women fear, and it may even be the thing holding many women from pursuing public and political roles. How do you navigate the standards of being a Native woman and holding a position of power?
That is a really great question, and that was probably one of my first questions into getting into politics. And I connected with a lot of Indigenous women who have been an elected official or currently are, and this was probably my main question: is how do you balance being an Indigenous person while being in politics? Because oftentimes you are representing a constituent base that is not majority Native. Unless you're in tribal politics, your constituents are probably only going to be a small percentage of Native people. It's also drawing this line of where you want to be tough, um, but you also want to fight expectations to be a stoic Native person. This dynamic of always having to carry all of this without showing expressions, but to also maybe not be too passionate. I mean, I think we can see this in all female politicians, and especially at the higher level, where they say, if you don't show enough emotion, then they're not really, female, are not showing that female characteristics. But when they become too emotional, oh, they're too emotional for politics. It's this weird balance I think we really just got to get rid of. It's completely toxic, and also facing pressure to be too native in politics. I look back at my campaign. I wanted to, be a proud Indigenous woman, but how do you balance that with a political campaign where most of the constituents are non-native? And I look back into the symbolism. We didn't want it to be too native, but there's a couple times where I was like, okay, I can't hold back who I really am. And I was so glad that my team was really supportive in my culture, to the point where, when I went to first file for office, I wore my traditional Diné regalia, traditional outfit, and my campaign manager took a photo of me, and this was kind of the theme of my campaign, and even made it on a lot of my mailers, where it had me and wearing my TA and wearing my traditional jewelry, and I'm like this, and it was great to see, that be taken, responded very well. Where unfortunately, maybe in a lot of communities, it wasn't. So I feel completely blessed and lucky to have a supportive community who celebrates my diversities and who encourages me every step of the way to speak up, to be that loud noise. And, I'm still learning on when to be necessarily aggressive, but, a lot of times in this job too, we still get the stereotypical, I don't meet a lot of natives, or, Oklahoma and Cherokee, and Ancestry.com, that sort of realm. And when in this game of politics do you say, no, this is, you shouldn't be saying something like that? But when is it okay? It's just like, it's just another day. We'll pick that fight another time. But also how to improve situations and, continue to be myself while not, alienating too many people is such a challenge in politics. And I'm so curious to see how, in Congress they do it. But I think they handle it very gracefully. And I think each of us handle it in a very different manner because of our personalities and our, our constituent basis. But I think we're all doing okay so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that balance is something that many women, both native and non-native, struggle with. There are times where I've had to ask myself, which version of myself am I bringing to the table? Am I the mom, the educator, the woman, the Navajo woman? And all of these thoughts are just happening all at once. There seems to be a lot on your so-called plates. Could you each tell me a little bit more about what is one project you have worked on or are currently working on that has made and is making big change? Let's start with Aidan.
So right now I am on the executive council for my tribe, the Wyandot Nation, and we are working on revising our constitution, which is kind of a huge undertaking. Yeah. And for those, I guess, who aren't familiar, in 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act was passed. And along with that, a lot of tribes were encouraged to adopt this, tribal constitution. And it was really just boilerplate language. And it worked for some tribes because it did align with, a centralized government, representation, all sorts of stuff, kind of just worked with how the tribes ran already self-governed traditionally. But for some tribes, it was not how they governed at all. So it didn't quite work out as well. And it kind of leads to this view of illegitimacy. So we're trying to amend our constitution to better reflect the values of our tribe. And like I mentioned, that's really important because it kind of, helps bolster our ability to govern ourselves. It just more fulfills the idea of tribal sovereignty and making sure that, we're making the decisions we want to make, how we want to make them. And so we're doing this in pursuit of federal recognition. It's our tribe's contention that we never lost federal recognition, but that's a whole other issue that is really
quite complicated.
Yeah, and I don't even fully understand it to this day. I'm learning so much from all of the elders in the group, and just everyone involved. It has been an extremely enlightening experience, and I think that I feel really blessed that they asked me to help in this capacity. I think, as Christina said earlier, when you're asked by your community, you step up to the plate and you do the work that you need to do. So I'm just super glad that I was asked, and I think that it'll help me in years to come. And it's actually showing me that it's kind of helping with imposter syndrome, showing me that I knew a lot more than I thought I did. So it'll hopefully, help me, build a long-lasting relationship with other communities as well, and continuing to help me reconnect with my tribe.
That's amazing. Congratulations. That's so exciting, not just for your nation, but as a model for others as well. Christina, can you tell me about some of the work you've been doing?
Yeah, before I just want to, I'm with Aidan on the imposter syndrome. That's literally my crisis conversation each week where I talk to people who are incumbents. And people reassure me that I'm doing good. But, it's just always like I'm my biggest critic. And I'm like, oh, I could be just doing so much better. Like, I don't know, you feel like you need to fix the world, but then sometimes you're in these positions of power and you just feel, when you understand your powers and limits, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of limits to what you can and can't change. But
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. So I've been working on quite a few bills, and I pre-filed 3 bills. One of them was HB 2008, which I co-sponsored with Representative Dr. Pankowi Victors on missing Indigenous peoples. That one has been doing so well, and that's the one last year that she introduced. But in Kansas, our session came to a halt because of COVID-19. So this bill passed out of the House and then died in committee on the Senate side. But this year for this situation, it passed out of the committee in the House side. It passed out in the House chamber side unanimously. So it's now on the Senate side, and we're just waiting for that hearing date. And it's been a great, working on this bill and providing testimony where I could give that expertise of where I worked at the national nonprofit level with the National Council for Urban Health on how does this issue affect urban areas, because I was really trying to tailor that message to, this is a crisis that happens underneath our noses. And, the other bigger issue is the data invisibility. So I'm trying to communicate that message to my colleagues who might not be aware of this type of issue. HB 2006 is to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. This bill has been championed in my community by Haskell Nations University students and also the Indigenous students in Lawrence and the surrounding Douglas County area who constantly go to the city of Lawrence to get this day change in recognition for Indigenous Peoples Day. And, our town can only do so much without the state levels change. So this is another bill that also recognizes. I'm a co-sponsor on this bill, along with Representative Heiberger, who he is non-native, but he represents a big majority of the University of Kansas population. Then we have me, Representative Stephanie Byers, Representative Dr. Pankowi Victors, who are all the natives in the current state legislature today. Another bill I've been working on, HB 2033, which is raising the minimum wage to $15, which here in the state of Kansas is currently $7.25. This is something that we really need, and especially in my community, in the Lawrence, Kansas community, the livable wage and just buying a house and just living there is one of the highest places to live here in Kansas. And one of the biggest issues, one of the many big issues, is keeping young people in Kansas and planting roots here. And having their career here is something that we want to focus on, and hopefully this will also help at the other conversations of states to raising their minimum wages. I believe a lot of our surrounding states have already or are currently on the path to raising their minimum wage. And our cities, such as Kansas City, that shares in Missouri and Kansas, a lot of our talent is probably being pushed to the Missouri side because of the wage. And I also look back on my personal experience of being a college student at high school, where I was a full-time student. I was working part-time at the local grocery store as a cashier, and even that lifestyle, my paycheck at $7.25 an hour just wasn't really cutting it. Like, I really barely had gas money, and you know barely had just enough money that I felt comfortable with. So when I think about people and families and single parents and those who take care of their grandparents, that the 725 is just way too low. But I also have other bills that I've been working on too. One of the biggest ones I probably am proud of is the legalization of cannabis, which I believe is a good economic driver for our state of Kansas when we have such a big shortfall in revenue. Um, and, a lot of good work here going on in Kansas.
The work that you two are doing, whether on the House floor, behind the scenes, or while participating in conversations with community members, does not go unnoticed, and it's desperately needed. With HB 2008, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Bill, it is extremely necessary. It is reported that more than 1 in 3 Native women have experienced violence in the last year. And homicide is the 5th leading cause of death for American Indian and Alaska Native women between the ages of 25 and 34. All of the projects you are working on are adding to the collective shift we see in this country. I know that you two are not even close to being done with your jobs. So, Aidan, what shoot for the moon change would you like to see happen eventually? Is there a first step to take?
So my absolute shoot for the moon is, I would like to see all tribes have a land base and the resources they need to get help to help their citizens and have their rights be respected. And another thing that I'm reminded of, Ginsburg has that quote about, how many women is enough to have on the Supreme Court. And she says, or it's when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And then she says when there are 9. And I would like to see that all of the Supreme Court justices know Indian law on the Supreme Court. So when there are 9 Supreme Court justices that know Indian law on the bench, I will be so happy. And I think that the steps, all the stuff that Christina and I have talked about doing are kind of those steps, those first steps. They're every day. They take years, but I think, those small steps are always the first steps, and they always have to be consistent. So.
Yeah, you absolutely have to start somewhere. Christina, what's your shoot for the moon?
I think tribal sovereignty and seeing this fulfilled to its full amount, and seeing our economics thrive. I would love to see if we had the resources to really embrace this, and what would our communities look like now. I believe we're in the right direction, because a lot of us young people are coming out of school or still going to school and have all these great big ideas, and we're going into these fields that are probably not as traditional. A lot of my favorite examples is like fashion and music and entertainment industries, where we can really create this cultural change. I'm also really excited, for Navajo Nation to get their first female president. And I don't know if it's going to be me. It's probably not going to be me, but I would love to help somebody who is qualified, because I think I'm not fluent in Navajo, so I think we all know how that goes. But I would love to see something like that, even within our own tribal government system. And I agree with Aidan too. Why our Supreme Court judges don't know federal Indian law? They should. And to see this filing when we're not asking for that type of representation is a good shoot for the start. But I also think a lot of this is accomplishable.
Yeah, it's definitely tangible. I really appreciate that the both of you are envisioning a future where we see a balance and understanding between sovereign Native nations and the federal government. These two things can exist at the same time, and I know that you will both continue to make that happen. What specific issues would you like the audience to be more aware of? How would they contribute to a positive change? Christina, what do you want our audience to be more aware of?
I guess coming from the policy and politicians side, I'd like to see more Indigenous peoples get involved in political campaigns. I had this wild dream when I was first starting out that I would have an all Indigenous campaign team. But then I found out there's not a lot of Indigenous peoples who go into campaign management or campaign communications, campaign digital media. I think really opening this avenue to Indigenous talent, because I think we're really great at doing activism work, and paying respects to that, but also seeing that we have to get into this type of avenue, this type of role. I want to encourage more natives to bring their perspectives into these positions. Even this space and even this building that I'm in right now, it's completely intimidating. They built this building with no intentions of me sitting right here. Even though I'm in the basement, hey, I still made it. But I want
to that internet.
that internet too, and because of COVID, we're in the gallery, so in the chamber. But hey, I still made it, and that's the one thing that really was going through my mind when I got sworn in that day. Is whatever they tried to do in this building, whatever kind of close the door conversations they try to have, it absolutely failed to eliminate Indigenous peoples, to discriminate, to intimidate. It completely failed, and I want to bring more Indigenous peoples into the spaces that have interests, or even in their own state communities, or even down to the local level with their city boards. Just really leave, as Congresswoman Deb Haaland once told me, to leave down the ladder and to bring others with you. And I think about that too, because I'm not planning to be here for 50 plus years. Like, someone has to come take my seat. And I really appreciate this atmosphere in this life. But another thing that I would like to see too is to teach people, I guess, the dynamics of politics, and this system that oppressed us for so long. We can play the game too. We can go to law school with Aidan, and we can go in our respective fields and really try to think, how can we bring this back to our Indigenous communities, to make a better future for us and our grandchildren, and when we're not here anymore.
Yeah, Aidan, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Christina. That was one of the things I struggled with a lot coming to law school was, what am I doing here? And then I was like, I'm playing the game. I'm playing the game that they set up to keep us out. And I think it's just so cool to see us in these spaces and kind of showing that, like, no matter what they try, like, they're not really gonna win in the way that they think they're gonna win. And I think I would like, kind of as Christina said, more people to just be aware of that. And I think that it would do people a lot of good to know that, like, Native people aren't going anywhere. We're in these spaces and we're here to stay. And I think a lot about, KU is maybe working on a land acknowledgement. And there's been a lot of conversation about whether land acknowledgement is quite enough. So I think that might be something I'd want to bring to people's attention, is like, sure, you can say you acknowledge the land that we're on, but like, what else? Like, what about it? That's great. That's a good first step, but there's so much more to do than to just, make a declaration of acknowledgement. And, we're looking for more. We're here and we need support now, not just acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so exciting to hear about all of the action you both are doing and that you hope to see our next generation making. There is this cultural idea really around 7 generations, that what you do today will affect the next 7 generations. And I think of that daily, that we are someone's 7th generation, that our grandmas and aunties were thinking of us when they made difficult choices in the past, and how their legacy lives on in our work. What is the legacy you strive to leave? Aidan, I'd love to hear that.
The legacy that I would like to leave is being known for my willingness to help others, being a go-to source for anything within a tribal community. One thing that I learned recently in my internship while working for this law firm that was just full of Native women, it was so cool. We got thrown everything from super small, individualized, like things that I can just go look up for an individual tribal member, to doing stuff for, the tribal council themselves. I want to be that go-to person for anyone. Just being capable, being willing to help however I can. I would also, like to be known as someone who can be motivational and can inspire, like for coming generations through mentorship, and someone that's willing to make connections and network with others who may know more when I don't have the answer. I'm always willing. If someone comes to me with a question and I don't know, I want to have someone that I can turn to, that I can share that information with, share that question with, and get this person with the question moving forward in the direction that they need to go to better serve people in the future as well.
Thank you so much. Christina, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think that this position as a politician is accessible. There's no perfect path, there's no perfect degree that's going to get you there. There's no perfect resume that's going to get you there. If you have a passion for your community and passion for the issues, to fight for it, and if you have the energy to fight for it, I think that makes you all qualified to be in this position. And I hope that I really want to keep this level of transparency, because I'm trying to kind of leave like a, this is, you can do it too, and this is how it's being done. And I like to think that when I go through this political space, that I didn't go to law school, so I always have to have the most layman's terms of the law, a summary of it, and what's it going to do, what's the consequences of it. But also I want to keep that level of transparency, and I want to fight against, I want to be known to fight against the stigma of, maybe I was in that stigma for failing classes, but you don't always have to stay in that negative stigma. I'm now in a, minority stigma of Indigenous women being in politics. I don't know if that's even a stigma, but I want to encourage others to use their voices and be loud in these spaces. Even just showing up. That's my biggest advice to a lot of people, is just to show up to these spaces, and you don't need an invitation. When I was getting started, I would just go on Facebook and find the date, the time, and the place, and just show up. Say, my name is, and I am an Indigenous person, and I am wanting to know, what are you doing for our Indigenous community? And like 99% of the time, they're going to say, oh, I don't know. Even at our Supreme Court level, they don't know about Indigenous law and Indigenous policies and what's going on in our communities, let alone what's going on in Indigenous rural and Indigenous urban communities. So I really want to encourage and to, show people that you are welcome in the spaces, even if they don't feel welcoming. It could be intimidating, but that's the resiliency of our existence. There's a lot of sacrifices, that got us here today, and each and every one of you have a purpose here on Mother Earth. Maybe if you don't know it today, and it could change too. Maybe my purpose, in the next 20 years is to be a mother. Maybe that will be my purpose, hopefully one day. But, just knowing that your voice is needed in these spaces too. You have the power to do that.
Wow, thank you both so much. I would like to thank both of our panelists, Aidan Graybill and Christina Haswood, for joining us in this conversation. And to the other Native women who came before us to blaze new trails and challenge the status quo, we say their names. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement to Lori Jump of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. She is the director of Strong Hearts Native Helpline, which is a resource to Natives experiencing violence on a national level. Honorable Council Delegate Amber K. Karate of the Navajo Nation, fighting for and establishing the Amber Alert system on her reservation to keep our relatives informed and our children safe at home. National Native American Law Students Association President Paulina Beta, advocating nationally for Native law students, and Jackie Schwartz, a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, working at Douglas High School, where she creates opportunities for Native high school students to connect with each other and to the larger Native organizations. Each of these Native women and countless others are standing up and speaking out. They are truly paving the way for future generations seeking equity and opportunity for Native American people and all Americans. Thank you to the Rasmussen Foundation for their generous support of this program and to everyone that has worked on our Youth in Action series. Recordings of past episodes in this series are posted on the museum's YouTube channel. To learn more about Native women making change and to explore other ways you can enjoy the National Museum of the American Indian from home, please visit our website, americanindian.si.edu. Thank you for joining us.